What's your thinking in terms of keeping things conservative all the way?
Well, we do certainly take a view that we need to avoid large losses as participants near retirement. There's a whole host of reasons for that. First of all, participants now, I mean, over the last 40 years, the responsibility for saving for retirement has shifted from, pension plans where there was pooled risk to the individual, and they bear every bit of that risk themselves. And if they're faced with a large loss as they start to get close to retirement, start to take distributions or want to annuitize that lump sum they've saved, first of all, a large loss of 15, 20, 25% might just mathematically be impossible to overcome. The time value of fluctuations is such that it takes a much larger gain to get back to even. The other thing is we've got to be aware of investor behavior. I mean, we've seen it for years and years and years that investors are driven by two things, greed and fear typically outweighs the greed part. We typically as humans have about a 2-to-1 emotional kind of attachment to a loss versus a gain. So we would much rather avoid a loss than we would have a gain. And so we see a lot of bad behavior on the part of investors too, and we want to try to avoid that. So if you set them up with a large loss close to retirement, and they feel that pain and they get scared and they exit at the bottom, they're basically locking in those losses and typically miss out on the opportunities to recapture that gain. And so we want to avoid both of those things.
Are investors overexposed to equities, would you say?
I think some are. If you look at a retirement plan, let's say a 401k that has not had the benefit of some of the impacts of the Pension Protection Act of 2006 and instituted a QDIA, there was a lot of barbelling. So you had a lot of people that might have been all equities or all cash. So you don't typically find investors, if left their own devices, that really have a portfolio that matches their risk tolerance. There's a lot of momentum there where people enroll in the program, they maybe pick an all stock portfolio and they just leave it that way, or they're scared to, they just don't know what they're supposed to do, and so they invest in something that's overly conservative. So you do have a lot of barbelling in what I'd call kind of an untouched defined contribution plan, where people can be significantly overweighted equities.
What about some of the concerns now with bonds, though, that the bonds have run up too much, there's a bond bubble, if we start to see a move in rate, people are going to be losing money. So how do you sort of reconcile that issue as well?
It's a serious question in the target date space specifically, because a lot of these target date funds do rely exclusively on fixed income as their mitigator of equity risk. And so they have a glide path that says, okay, we're going to reduce equities and we're going to fill in the rest of that bucket with fixed income, typically long fixed income. And there can be a lot of risk there. It's been an incredible 20, 25 years for fixed income. The way we do things is we worked with Dr. Markowitz back in the early 90s, and we use a risk-based optimization process that will actually start to turn to cash as an investment. So in a rising rate environment, two things is going to happen. You're going to see that fixed income, because of the increased volatility, is not as good of a mitigator of equity risk, because its correlation is going to go up with equities, right? The other thing is, in a rising rate environment, even a high inflationary kind of environment, cash is a really good strategic investment. So a lot of funds don't want to use cash as a strategic investment because people don't want to pay for you to manage cash. We see it as a very strategic asset class. And at a time when we have rising rates and a lot of downside volatility in long fixed income, it's going to be a better mitigator of equity risk, and it's going to be a great investment too because of the yields.
Do you use, or do you see in the future moving toward using more alternative investments, whether that's real estate or commodities? We know investors have been doing that overall in their general portfolios. Is there a place for that in target date funds?
I think there is, Rhonda, but you've got to be careful with how you apply that in a set of target date funds. We do get exposure to global real estate within our equity portfolio, about 6%, but we don't split it out as a separate asset class. We feel that kind of that global cap weight is probably sufficient. When most people, when they get close to retirement, they already have a large sleeve of real estate in their primary residence, more than likely. And a lot of people got hurt by that in 2008. Commodities, we feel that it's good to get that exposure through a broadly diversified equity portfolio. But there are other asset classes that I think we're starting to see a lot of target date funds move into that I think are adding risk. So equities is not your only source of risk. I think sometimes when you go into things like high yield, emerging markets debt, even TIPS have a good bit of volatility versus an ag bond portfolio. You've got to be aware of how those impact your overall risk posture. And so if you may be reducing equities, but if you load up your portfolio so high with high yield, emerging markets debt, and some of these others, that your risk profile is actually much higher, those participants, you need to be aware of that, and fiduciaries need to be aware of that too. I do think there is a place, but you have to really be smart in the way you apply those and not throw off really the goal of what you're trying to accomplish for those individuals.